Hello, Abraham. I am very thankful for your work and for being here. And I am amazed that all my questions were answered, but then I got a new one. And I think that's how it goes, right?
That is why we call it co-creation at its best. We love the ones that hatch, because you get in the receptive mode and then you hatch a question. And in the receptive mode, you're going to hear the answer.
Okay, then I'm really happy about it. I'm happy about having the new question too. So when we were talking about understand it, but don't explain it.
And what we mean by that, when we say that to Esther, because everything we say, we're saying to the person we're saying it to for the reason that we're saying it. So that's why you can't take something that we've said to somebody and apply it necessarily across the board, because you're all in a different place. But the reason we say that, what we mean by that is, don't try to explain it to someone who's not in a position to hear it. Because when you try to explain something to somebody who can't hear it, then how they feel about it often is something that you begin to observe, and then you take on their doubt or their clutter into your vibration, and then you diminish your own power. So that's what we say, don't try to explain to people who, first of all, aren't asking, and second of all, are not ready to hear what they're asking for. And you can kind of tell in the tone of the question. When someone asks the question, well, how come? You can sort of tell they're not ready. Or, why not me? They're not ready. Or, how come they get it and I don't? They're not ready.
Right, but I also took it to mean, like for myself, for instance, there are people teaching.
Have you noticed that we never stop explaining to you all? We're explaining it and explaining it and explaining it and explaining it and explaining it. We understand it and we are explaining. But we understand in our explaining that often you are ready to hear. And we also understand that even if you're not right now, this red hot minute, really ready to understand it fully, you'll get enough of it that then life will show it to you. And then you'll understand.
Oh, that's good. And my question had to do with journaling, because when we're talking about this understand but don't explain, I got it to mean to me like, because there's some people that say it's important to understand where you're coming from, and sometimes journaling can help you process what it is that you believe, because sometimes it can be so automatic that you don't even realize you have this feeling. So that's what I understood by understand but don't keep once you understand, just don't keep explaining what it is.
Here's the thing about that. We think journaling is nice, but we would use our journaling to emphasize our momentum. We wouldn't use it so much to try to get momentum going as we would when we recognize that we feel good, to just keep it going and maybe practice the feeling of it longer. What happens with people sometimes is that in the examination, they introduce more resistance than is necessary. You just have to be aware of how you're feeling when you're doing it.
Okay, yeah, I have used journaling for the future, like writing what I wanted, and I manifested a few things in that way. But recently I have been...
When you write it, there is a stronger point of focus.
For some people, for me, for instance, I'm good with words. So this is not English is not my native language, and I'm so thankful that I can have this conversation with you. So.
Nothing in and of itself is ever right or wrong. It's how you're feeling about it while you're doing it that really matters. And so if you're just really frustrated or discouraged about something, we wouldn't journal about it, because all you're going to do is enhance and sort of solidify the vibration of resistance. But when you're soaring, that's when we would journal.
But do you think it would be useful, or if I journal with the intention to, okay, I'm going to sort through this to get the learning from it, and so I can leave this belief behind, because once I know what it is, I can choose differently.
Here's something that we would really like you to focus on. Sometimes by writing it, you do remember it, but it's simply because you've practiced the vibration of it longer. Just remember this. Your brain is not a storage cabinet. It's a transmitting and receiving mechanism. So rather than trying to remember things, just feel as good as you can feel, so you're in the receptive mode, so that you can receive what's important moment by moment by moment by moment. In other words, that's where your intuition comes from, and your spontaneity and your good timing and your clarity. But if you try to remember, then you just get all bogged down. Sometimes Esther will say, so-and-so has a really good memory. And we remind her, it's not memory, it's tuning to a frequency that brings that back again. Have you ever noticed that when you get with this friend, you almost always talk about this. And when you get with this friend, you almost always talk about this. And when you get with this friend, you almost always talk about this. And that's not because you're remembering, picking up where you left off. It's because that's where you left that active vibration, and that's where you're rendezvousing. So again, you might want to play with your friends is, let's see where we're going now. Let's go our separate ways for a day or however long, and let's find our vibrational high place, and then let's get back together and see what new thing we accomplish together.
So you're talking about journaling, like for remembering from the day, right? There's also another way that it can be done. For instance, you write until you figure something out. Not necessarily retelling a story, but just trying to figure something out.
Anything that you're doing that's working for you, of course, keep doing it. We can tell you're really hung up on this journaling thing. So journal your little heart away. We're not trying to discourage it in any way. If it makes you feel better, if it gets the energy moving, it's a good thing.
Oh, that's good to hear, because I'm hung up on it, but I was willing to let it go if it wasn't the best idea. So,
well, just pay attention to how you feel. It's sort of like Esther used to sit at night and watch a little bit of television, and the catalogs, because she would order from things online, and catalogs would come and catalogs would come and catalogs would come and catalogs would come and catalogs would come, and she had a pile of them by her bedside because she wasn't there very often. And so then when she'd get there, she would sit and she would just start turning the pages of the catalog. And at first it was just delightful, but once she made herself through about 10 or 20 catalogs, she felt sick to her stomach. And it was because it was just too much stimulation about things that were not actively wanted in her experience right now. In other words, it was like someone offering to her things that she had not asked for. Don't you really like it when life lets you know you want it and you can just Google it and find it and order it, rather than going through pages and pages? Don't want anything on this page. Don't want anything on this page. Don't want anything on this page. And so there's something to be said for just letting the universe give you what you want. Just take it easy. We think this is a really good time for a segment of refreshment. And are you refreshed? Yes. Good. Now what?
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm looking for clarification. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with lung cancer. And I manifested that without having any conscious thought of getting cancer.
Yes.
And since having cancer, now every time I have an experience, my physical body, I wonder, oh, is this cancer?
Yeah.
And so then I'll go get a scan and they'll say, no, there's no cancer. So I'm curious as to, I manifested it without giving it conscious thought. And now that I give it a lot of conscious thought.
So think about the things you don't want. You may have heard us say earlier that the universe is not responding to your words, but to the way you feel. And one of the things that we think is most valuable about coming to understand how law of attraction works, and about vibration, and about how vibrations feel, because your emotions are your indicator of your relationship between the vibration of who you really are and the vibration of who you're allowing yourself to be. So one of the things that often happens, as you say, I do not remember thinking about that, but the essence of it is active in your vibration. So once you had the experience, you can either talk about initially or as you moved through it. That's the better place to go. Can you give us a word or two or three, an emotional word that describes what the experience felt like to you?
Uncertainty.
Sort of lack of control? Vulnerability? Are we putting the wrong words out?
I think control is probably...
So whenever you have an experience that inflames a strong emotion, something that does help it to sort of add up for you is to recognize that that emotion comes up frequently from this or this or this or this or this. In other words, it doesn't have to be the specific experience, but in essence, there are things in your life that are going on or have been going on that cause you to feel that way. So you moved through it, and now you're doing well. And so can you give us a descriptive emotional word of what it felt like to move through it?
Well, there was a lot of emotions through it, but it was really one of relief because it was probably the best experience you could have of it.
What about eagerness, clarity? Did you get clear about your desire to stick around for a while? Did you become more focused?
Yes, I became much clearer about.
And which vibration do you think is now more present within you? The vibration that is indicated by a feeling of relief and a feeling of respect and appreciation of life, or a feeling of guardedness and concern? We know that both are there, and it's natural. We don't see how any of you watch television without worrying about yourselves. Esther will say, I think I've got gout and mesothelioma. And maybe a little bit of that, 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 probably some of all of it.
So after this started is when I started listening to Abraham.
Yeah.
And so now my perspective is, yes, I went through that experience, and it wasn't the terrible experience that you so often hear about.
Yes.
But I also now have a much freer feeling about this physical experience coming to an end.
Yes. Well, it's like everything. Every bit of contrast, whether you realize it now or not, will lead you to something that is more and something that has a potential of feeling better. It's just a question of whether you go there. And so we think the most important thing for you to acknowledge is that sometimes thoughts come and you sort of go dark on it, you worry, but begin noticing that this is something that we really want you to hear. From where you are now and how clear you feel, and from our understanding of what's coming next, this is something that we would really like you to hear. So some years ago, Esther's father had a heart condition, and he was in the hospital. And the doctors wanted to talk to all of the family, and Esther was traveling. It was before her cell phone had really good cell phone service everywhere on the interstates. And so she had purchased a satellite phone, which they used on occasion. And so Esther can remember being in upstate New York, sitting out on a park bench, having this conversation with her family, who were all with her father and the physicians. And they were talking about his vulnerability, and Esther was listening but not wanting to emphasize it. And then the doctor said to his daughters, you all need to come in and have us check you out, because what he has is congenital, which means you probably have it too. And Esther said, I'm losing my satellite signal. And was done with him. But he had planted a very powerful seed. This is a very powerful doctor with very powerful knowing, who has been examining someone who is biologically very much associated with Esther. And Esther was, even though she had already heard some of this stuff from us and was feeling some of her invincibility, her feeling of vulnerability was activated by this conversation. So a few days later, she began having sharp pains under her rib cage. Very concerning to her. She didn't say anything to anybody about it. I've probably got that thing. And then, I've probably got that thing. And then, I've probably got that thing. And then she remembered that after the phone call, and before she thought she had that thing, she and Jerry had lifted a great big heavy. They had a cellar in the floor of their garage, and it had a cement lid that was about 36 inches wide and about 5 inches thick, and they put a 2x4 through it, and each one of them took one end of it, and they lifted this lid off this cellar. But Esther had completely forgotten about that. But what happened was, her feeling of vulnerability actually led her to action that would confirm the symptoms that she expected to find. It's so interesting how when you have a belief